When is the president simply going to say enough of this nonsense and ask Congress to declare war on ISIS?
Well, he has the authorizations necessary to conduct the war on terror from what we did the week after 9/11. We passed a resolution called an authorization for the use of military force, which in the modern day is the equivalent of a declaration of war. We don't actually use the term declaration of war. It's become, in a way, obsolete. It's associated with the dynastic wars. The last time that we declared war, of course, was after Pearl Harbor, but we don't do that anymore. But the authorization for the use of force is the equivalent. And we wrote it in September 2011 in a way that would apply to Al-Qaeda or others affiliated or associated with it. So you can make the case, and I think it's a reasonable one, that the authorization for anything that Obama wants to do is already there in terms of law. The problem is not authorization. The problem is will. And that's the problem that we've had for the last 6 years.
The president addresses the nation tonight, State of the Union. I know you're all going to run out of here to get to your televisions. The attendance has dropped. Today, Fox reported that they had gone from 43 million to 32 million to, I think it was under 20 million, that watch it because there's so much advanced word. And I know you know what the president's going to say tonight. He's going to ask for a tax cut for middle-class Americans, but he's going to tax the high-end Americans. Dr. Krauthammer, is that not DOA? Isn't it dead on arrival? Congress is never going to give him that.
It's DOA, and he knows it. This is theater. This is not legislation. This is not governing. This is a form of a presentation. It's kabuki. You are right. There's not a chance in hell that any of it will pass. Obama doesn't care about that. Obama wants to, he's got 2 years left. He calls this the fourth quarter. And for him, what he's thinking about is how he'll be remembered. He's not going to get any significant legislation passed. When he lost the House in November of 2010, his presidency was essentially over in terms of changing the laws. He got Obamacare through. He did not succeed in getting cap and trade, which would have essentially nationalized energy the way that Obamacare nationalizes healthcare. So he partially succeeded in this sort of very left-wing agenda that he had when he came into office. He knew after losing the House, and now, of course, after losing the Senate as well, that this is never going to be enacted, so we know what he's doing. He's trying to get things through either executive order or through regulation, meaning without Congress. So he's behaving the way they do in banana republics. He says to Congress, I want to do X. If you won't do it, I'm not going to wait for you, and I will do it on my own. Well, unfortunately, we have a constitution which says it doesn't work that way, unfortunately for Obama. Nonetheless, that's what he's going to do. So what he's doing, he's not going to get any of this tax stuff done, but he is going to do other things. And I think one of the things he's going to do, the most important thing he's going to do, is he's going to use the EPA and the Energy Department and the Interior Department to essentially take control of the energy industry, killing coal. Their next objective is going to be natural gas, and they are going to try to sort of regulate in a way that is going to clamp down. This Obama wants to conduct a crusade on climate change. And this is sort of his main objective in this remaining 2 years. The tax stuff is just a way to put down a marker for the future to try to shape the Democratic Party. It's not going to shape the country.
So as you looking to 2016, I'm going to pull this stunt. I'll box in the Republicans, and then in 16, I'll use it against them when my successor runs against whoever emerges from the Republican Party.
In 2008, Obama said something very interesting in a radio interview. He said Ronald Reagan changed the trajectory of the country the way that Bill Clinton did not. Now, what he meant by that is that Ronald Reagan had ended a 50-year ascendancy of liberalism, starting with FDR, going through Lyndon Johnson, and the sort of the second wave of liberalism with the Great Society and the War on Poverty, all the way till 1980. On January the 20th, 1981, Ronald Reagan is sworn in, and what does he say within 10 minutes of assuming the presidency? Government is not the solution to our problems. Government is the problem. That's sort of a complete overturning of the idea, the ideology underlying the New Deal, the Fair Deal, the Great Society, this 50 years older. And what Reagan succeeded in doing, this is what Obama meant, and this is one of the few things he was right about, which is that Reagan had succeeded. He didn't enact everything he wanted. He didn't end up cutting the size of government the way he wanted. He did cut taxes, but there was still a spending problem. But what he did do is he changed the ideological trajectory of the country. How do we know? In 1996, his Democratic successor declares in the State of the Union address, the era of big government is over. When the other side declares your philosophy as the philosophy of the country, you've won ideologically. He changed the zeitgeist.
Two schools of thought. You've written about it in Things That Matter. Is this the time that we should do some sort of normalization with Cuba, or still freeze them out, wait for the Castro brothers to die?
Well, these guys look to be fairly immortal.
Survived how many presidents?
I'm sure at some point they're going to die, but will we die first? Do you remember that Saturday Night Live skit, Franco is still alive?
Yes.
Evil people tend to live long. It's a problem. It's a theological problem that I'm not qualified to deal with, that I leave it to others in the clergy. But look, I would not be opposed to normalization in principle if we got something in return. The Castros waited through 10 presidencies, 4 of them Democrats, to get to a president who would give away the store for nothing. And I mean for nothing. Here we are. We don't need Cuban trade. It's an infinitesimal part of our trade. Cuba needs us. Here we are in a position of dominance and pressure. And Obama, as he does in every other negotiations, where we have dominance and pressure, gives away the store. The reset with Russia, the appalling negotiations we're now doing with Iran over their nuclear program. I wouldn't trust him to negotiate the price of lemonade in a stand out on the store. So he goes to the Castro brothers and he gives them full normalization, at least to the extent that a president can. There's a little bit that's in the hands of Congress, for nothing. What he should have done, and I would not have opposed this, wouldn't have opposed this in principle, would have been to say, all right, we'll give you some normalization in return for allowing access to the internet in your country. We'll do one step at a time, and we will reward any relaxation of the police state with something that we can offer you. If the Castros say no, we say, okay, we'll wait until you die. A risky proposition, as I said earlier. But there's no hurry for us, other than the only hurry was Obama's leaving office. That's the pressure on him. He wants to leave a legacy. He doesn't care how much it damages the cause of liberty that we have stood by for 50 years, and all the brave Cubans who've suffered, been imprisoned, been tortured, been exiled in the name of liberty. We are the country who said, in the words of John F. Kennedy, that we will bear any burden in the defense of liberty, and Obama betrayed that in doing this.
Let me be devil's advocate and ask you, the other side says, we ought to get in there and do business because the Canadians are in there, the Mexicans are in there, the Chinese, the Russians, everybody's doing business. We don't take exception with the Chinese that have horrible human rights violations. The Saudis have horrible human rights violations. We were at war with Vietnam and we have normal relations. What's the difference with Cuba?
So there are 2 answers, 3 answers. Number one, everybody else is benefiting. I'm not sure the American economy hinges on importing Cuban cigars. We went 50 years without Cuban cigars. I'm not an expert on cigars, and we did okay as a nation. Number 2, the idea that somehow, because other countries are doing this, and the argument usually is You know, if you open Cuba open to the West, to the United States, to all these liberal influences, to the internet, to interaction with tourists, it's going to change Cuba for the better. Well, we've already had that happen. Every country except us has normalized with Cuba. Canada, Spain, Britain, France, they have been flooded with Western influence for 30, 40 years. It has had zero effect on the police state. So that's an argument that's been historically refuted by the experience of other countries. The third item is probably the one that's the most powerful, the third argument. You know, China, Vietnam, why are we open with them, even though they're horrible on human rights? The reason is we never pretended that when we opened to China, that was for human rights reasons. That was for pure, cynical, national interest, and it created the greatest geopolitical shift of the entire post-World War II era. The normalization with China had one objective, and that was to move China out of the Soviet camp, essentially either into neutrality or, as it did, support us often against the Soviets. That was the beginning of the end of the Cold War, was that great shift. We had no illusions it was going to loosen up China. In fact, it occurred in the day of Mao, who was the worst of the worst, but it had an objective. There is no strategic objective or gain with Cuba. There is nothing that we gain out of this other than Obama leaves a legacy of a sort of, that was on the bucket list of a far left agenda, normalizing with China.
You write, build the wall, from an earlier Washington Post column, I believe. Do you still feel that way?
There's no question. Look, I think if you could convince the people of the United States that we had closed the southern border, you're not going to end it entirely. But as long as you turn a river of illegal immigrants into a trickle, and you have some kind of standard, a matrix, some kind of metrics for measuring that. If you're able to do that, so that you can now say to the American people that the 11 million illegal immigrants in the United States are the last cohort to be legalized, I think you would get an overwhelming consensus in the country. Okay, we're a humane country. We're not going to deport these 11 million people. We'll legalize them because it is the last cohort. But to say that, to do that, you have to close the border. And people talk about how impossible it is. You build a damn fence. This is not high tech. It's been done since Jericho. They did a wall, it wasn't a fence, it wasn't chain link, but it did come down. Okay? I mean, if fences don't work, why is there one around the White House? Although that may no longer be a good example. You guys know Dave Barry, who's the funniest guy on earth. He does a year-end review, and he says that, when was it, September? He says, in September, someone jumped the White House wall, ran across the lawn, and entered the White House through an empty door, ate all the buffet, appointed 3 federal judges before he was tackled by an off-duty Social Security agent. So I may have to revise my view of fences.
There are 2 incredible lines in this book. There's so many great lines, and I hope you all get a copy of this. My favorite is, in discussing in things that matter, people like John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, Madeleine Albright, who found out later in life that they were Jewish. Your line, and I was listening to it on audio in my car, and I burst out laughing, is, all people are Jewish unless proven otherwise.
That's Krauthammer's first law, and it is invariably true. There's a corollary to Krauthammer's first law, which I've been working on over the years, because this is what I do in my spare time, which is every entertainer whose last name is a first name is Jewish. Woody Allen, Kirk Douglas, Jon Stewart, Jason Alexander. I could go through. There's only one exception, Ray Charles. So I'm still working on that one.